Bright Sports Store.
Well, hi, Mom. We are now on the
Hi.
air. How you doing?
Doing okay.
Well, good. So, I've got you on the phone, and I'm broadcasting right now, and I thought it'd be cool to go over some things from your childhood since you were relatively close to the Great Depression, and I think that maybe it would maybe we can like just have a walk down memory lane and talk about things that actually might be helpful to various people. Let me do this real quick. All right. So, right now I've got my mother on the line, and we are talking about what life was like after the Great Depression in the United States. And she grew up a little bit after the Great Depression, and we're going to talk about that. We're going to just have a little chit chat about the whole thing. And so let me go ahead and set this up real quick. Do that there. And here we go. So um, I have some questions, and then you can just kind of spin off those questions if you don't mind.
Sure, that's fine.
Okay. So um, first of all, you what year were you born?
1940.
1940. And when was the Great Depression? When was the Great Depression officially, according to the U.S. government, ending?
That I don't know. I don't know if I've ever heard.
So the Great Depression, what was 1929,
I believe so, yes.
and the results and the ramifications were long lasting. So in other words, while there was growth in the country, there wasn't necessarily widespread economic flourishing at that time. So um, before we get into your actual childhood, tell me a little bit, if you remember, tell me what you remember about Grandpa describing his childhood as. Where did he come from? How did he start out? Just very quickly, and maybe a couple of stories that he told you about, so we can kind of get a little idea who he is, and then I'm going to do the same thing with Grandma.
Well, he was born in Germany,
Mm-hmm.
and he didn't. His mother and father came over here before he did,
Mm-hmm.
and he came over when he was 14, of course, and went through Ellis Island,
Mm-hmm.
and he lived for a while in Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if he's back then you could start working whenever,
Mm-hmm.
there was no restrictions on age. Uh, so he worked there for a while, and he was a teamster, of course. They still used a lot of horses.
Okay, so just so we clarify, Teamster is not the Teamster Union. A Teamster is someone who works with a team of horses.
That's right.
Okay.
That is right.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know when his parents or he came to Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me.
Mm-hmm.
But I know they bought a small farm outside of Tawas City,
Okay.
Michigan,
Okay.
and we lived there. We was a mile back from our nearest neighbors,
Mm-hmm.
and so we were real countrified.
Mm-hmm.
And Grandpa and Grandma Romer lost their first house in a fire,
That
so
would
that
be
set them back.
that would be your grandparents.
That would be my grandparents and my father.
Okay. Was
Uh,
he an only child?
yes,
Okay.
he was an only child,
Mm-hmm.
and
So
so they lost everything in
yeah,
that.
I remember him or you telling me something about when Buffalo Bill would bring in his camps for resupply, that Grandpa would stable his horses for him in what was in
Oh,
Chicago, what was like parking garages now, where you had different levels, and you would drive the horses up the ramps into various levels where they were taken care of. I don't know if you remember that at all, but I certainly I remember being told about it.
I don't know about that either.
Okay.
But I do remember too that during the Depression, Grandpa tried to sell bushels of potatoes for 10 cents,
Hmm.
and the people did not have the money.
Wow.
So he eventually gave the potatoes away to people.
Okay, so back then, this is kind of interesting because back then, um, this was just before World War II or just after World War II?
Well, it would be. I'm sure it would be after World
So
War II.
from my understanding, over in Germany, because well, it would have been after World War II because he came here, his family came here to escape Hitler, correct?
I don't know why they came. I
Okay.
never heard about that, but I know when the uh, well, some of the war had been going on when I was young yet, because Grandpa, it's either that or after the aftermath of the war. Grandpa and Grandma would get a newspaper from Germany, and I remember Dad. And after Grandma died, I remember when we moved over in with them, in with Grandpa, that Dad and Grandpa was horrified at what was taking place in Germany and had taken place. So
The reason why I ask is because from my understanding that during the time that Hitler was over there wreaking havoc, food became scarce. It was just the opposite of what he had promised, and he had appealed to the working class people, promising them prosperity. And by the end of the time that he was done with it all, they were so dirt poor that chickens, a single chicken to lay eggs was $1,200 at that time. $1,200 a chicken, and nobody could afford a chicken. And and so now Grandpa's over here after World War II as a young lad trying to sell potatoes. 10 cents a bushel, you said?
that's what I remember.
10 cents a bushel, and nobody could afford 10 cents for an entire bushel basket of potatoes.
No, and my uh, grandfather in particular was heartbroken because his when the war was over, his sister was caught in the communist part,
Mm-hmm. East
and
Germany.
he would send her, yeah, and he would send her bundles of things that she could use,
Mm-hmm.
and every time she'd open it up, one of the main things that he would send her would be gone.
Mm,
They opened the mail on people and took what they wanted.
yeah. which is
Very
which
sad.
is it's indicative of third world dictatorship countries. Even today, they do that. I mean, how many
That's
countries do?
terrible.
Yeah, how many countries does the U.S. send shiploads of grain and food and whatnot over, and how often does it actually reach the people that it's intended for?
Yep, that's
So,
true.
yep. So from there, that the house that Grandpa grew up in with his family, his mother and father, was that on the land that was where the first house was that you actually grew up in?
I think so. I'm not positive, but I'm thinking so. So I must have heard something about it at some time or another and have forgotten just what.
Mm-hmm.
Because you hear things as a child, and
Mm-hmm.
then you're not sure as you get older,
Mm-hmm.
right? And the house we grew up in, till I was 8,
Okay, 8 years
it
old.
was it was a 3-room house, and it was what you would call a tar paper shack.
Mm-hmm.
And the backside where the bedroom was, it was like more like a log cabin,
Right.
and it had stuffing between the, I don't know what you'd call it, between the logs there. And it wasn't all that unusual for some of that stuff to come out in the wintertime, and then we would wake up with snow on our bed,
Yeah, that's
which
crazy.
And the thing of it is, too, is we weren't the only poor people. Uh, when we were growing up, they had these, they were grain bags, and they had pretty prints in them. And so Mom would when they got the grain, they'd pick out some pretty prints, and Mom would make Dolores and I some dresses,
Mm-hmm.
and that helped a lot. Other than that, like winter coats and that, until I was in, must have been close to middle school or in middle school. That was the first time we ever had a new coat, and we had to have one because we didn't have any used ones. But
So
before that, it was
go ahead.
go ahead, Tim.
Well, I was just going to ask, going back to the house, how many children did Grandpa and Grandma have in that house?
There was three of us.
So it was not Aunt Elaine at the time; it was Uncle Art and Aunt Dolores and yourself.
Right, right.
Okay, so three children in a three-room house, and
And
go ahead.
well, and then we had the old iron cook stove,
Mm-hmm.
of course.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't. I was thinking lately of my mother canning on that thing in the
I
heat
was
of the summer.
Yeah, I was going to get into that in a little bit here.
Okay.
And go ahead. Just we can revisit it, but go ahead.
And of course, it was not insulated. Back then, a lot of houses weren't insulated
So it's
yet.
sheer heat then. In the winter it was sheer cold, and in the summer it was sheer heat.
Right. Sometimes Grandma would hang a blanket between the um, living room part and the kitchen to keep the heat out in the kitchen. So through the day, at least, we weren't so cold.
Hmm. So going back to Grandpa for just a moment, what is one of the earliest memories that you have of him as a little girl?
Hmm.
Like, do you remember him coming home from work,
Yes,
and how he would be greeted or not, or having to come home from work and then work some more? What kind of memories do you have of Grandpa as a young
he
girl?
yeah, he did do that. He would come home, and Grandma would have Mom would have supper ready,
Okay.
and then he would eat, and then he would go out and milk the cows
Oh, so you had
and
cows.
yeah, feed feed the animals, and of course take all the manure out of the barn and
Hmm.
stuff.
Hmm.
He didn't let his animals suffer with, you know, a lot
There,
of stuff.
yeah, there
They
was
have
no
that.
sores on their legs or anything like that from
No,
neglect.
no, and
Hmm.
he kept a. It's called. You can get it in the drugstore today. A bag bomb, and he would use that on the cows if they got sores,
Hmm. Hmm.
on their body.
So in that first house, and I'm going to ask you another question before we get too far down this rabbit hole. In that first house, the animals, were they across the road at that time where the house that I remember was, or were they in the same vicinity as the house that you grew up in, the tar paper shack?
No, they were in that barn that you remember.
Okay, so the just so people can kind of draw a picture in their mind. So when you come off the main road, you hang a left and you go a mile back, and I know who your neighbors were on the corner there. I remember them. And
Okay.
you go Tebow's, and you go a mile back, and on you go over the railroad tracks, and about 2/10 of a mile on the right hand side was where my mom grew up. And across the road, just slightly, ever so slightly, kitty corner, was the house in the land that I remember. And we'll get into that in just a few minutes. So on the right is the paper shack. What else was on that side of the road in that vicinity of that first house that you guys had? Um, was it just the house and the gardening and the animals were on the other side of the road before the new house was built, or was there things going on the same side of the road that with the tar paper shack, that the three-room shack that you guys grew up in?
There wasn't anything except the outside bathroom, which we hated.
The outhouse,
Yes,
the hole in the ground that was freezing in the winter and stinky in the summer.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, so
That's about it. And then you go down. We had a lane you go down between the two fields,
yes.
and then there was the pasture and the woods for the animals
Hmm.
when they could be let out
And
into the pasture.
that was past, you're talking about the field past the barn.
No, I'm talking about in the house I grew up till I was 8. That house, and you go to you go back away from the road, and you go. Uh, there was a lane with
So this is on the same side of the road that you're talking about now before you get into the woods actually on that road.
yeah, there was the pasture. You go down a long lane, and then there was the pasture to put the cows and the animals in. There was no pasture um, y- on the when we moved over after Grandma Romer died,
Hmm.
and Grandpa was alone in that house, and the house was in better shape than what we were living in. So then we moved in with him.
Okay,
Of course, there was
so the house I remember was actually great grandpa Romer's house.
right.
Oh,
That's right.
okay. I
And
don't recall that.
there was no electricity.
Hmm.
There was no running water.
Hmm.
There was no telephone.
Hmm.
And this was real hard. I realized later must have been terrible hard for Grandma because if we got really sick, Dad would be at work. She would have to walk the mile out to use the neighbor's phone to
Hmm.
call the doctor. And fortunately, Dr. Hess would come out and check on us and bring medicine, and so he was a real good doctor.
Mm.
But it had to have been as you're growing up, you don't realize it
Hmm.
how hard it must have been for my mother
Hmm.
because before she got uh, gas um,
Heat and
wringer
cook.
washer,
Hmm.
she had to wash on a scrub board.
Hmm.
That must have been a real hard chore.
Without running water.
Right, but Grandpa would haul the water for her. He
Hmm.
didn't expect her to go get it
Mm.
because then you have the wringer washer and then you have 2 rinse tubs,
Hmm.
and it was that even that would be a lot of work, but it would sure seem like heavenly after doing it on a scrub board.
Right, right.
So
So you moved from the right side of the road to the left side of the road at 8 years old. Before
right.
that, you were going to school already. How far
Right.
was the schoolhouse from you guys walked to school and back? And
Right.
people back when I was growing up made the joke, oh yeah, back in the day we walked to school in bare feet in the snow, uphill both ways, blah. But in reality, that was not too far off from reality when you was a little girl, because coming off of town line, you had the little rise up off the road, so you would go uphill, and it was rolling country, so you would go uphill and downhill both ways at some point in the juncture between home and school.
Well, when we were small, sometimes on that hill, years ago, we used to get more snow than what we do now,
Yes.
and that may change.
Hmm.
So, but anyway, we had that hill to go up, and when we were small, sometimes we would sit down halfway there and take a rest before we finished going up the hill. And we actually walked 2 miles to school.
Hmm.
And the first year, when I was in first grade, we went to the white schoolhouse, which when you come out onto the town line was on the left.
Okay.
And why we changed, I do not know.
Hmm.
But after that year, then we went 2 miles to the red schoolhouse,
Which is
which,
the one I know about.
yep. So I don't know why. And of course, back then, the town line would get all muddy too. It wasn't paved at all.
Right.
But and it sounds hard, but when you were growing up in it, it was just the way things were.
Right.
So, and other people had the same thing. And when I talk about the clothing, a lot of the kids that we went to school with had the same thing: used clothes, hand-me-downs,
Right. So that was the
whatever
next.
they could.
Yeah. So whatever they could get. The next question I had was, so did you go to downtown to the department store to get clothing at all, or was it all hand-me-downs from other people that were slightly better off? And then I remember you telling me also, and you mentioned it earlier, that you would get basically what was considered burlap that had print on it that you could make burlap or burlap type of textured
N- No, it
bags.
wasn't burlap. No, it was not burlap
Okay,
at all.
so it was
It was regular cloth, but it wasn't soft cloth
right.
really. But it was comfortable enough.
So it didn't did it come as clothing bolts like cloth bolts, or it came? How did it come, and why did you guys
Well,
use
it come
that?
like a sack, because it held that green.
So it was a grain sack.
Right.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
No, and we did not buy. I don't remember ever buying until I was older and could babysit myself,
Mm-hmm.
and when I was working, then I bought clothes.
Okay.
But before that, Grandma made most of our clothes.
Hmm.
When we was in high school, though, we was able to order like blouses and stuff like that from the catalog. And back then, if you knew your size, you could order from the catalog, and it always fit like it should.
Huh. So what
It's
catalog was
not like
that?
Sears and Roebuck was
Okay.
one of them.
Mm-hmm.
Spiegel.
Mm-hmm.
Um, seems like there's a Montgomery Ward's,
Yes.
and there might have been more. I remember those.
Interesting. In those catalogs, you could order everything from clothing to motorcycles to guns to supplies to bicycles to dishes. You could order anything out of those catalogs.
Well, I don't remember too much about that. I was too interested in the clothing part.
Yeah. Well, I remember. Well, oh, and that's another thing I want to ask you. But I remember. I remember when Dad bought a motorcycle. It was a Sears and Buck motorcycle, and he also bought a gun from Sears and Roebuck at one point. He told me. So
That I do remember, that kind of stuff. And
yeah.
shoes, of course,
Yes.
and work boots and
Yes.
underwear and
Hmm.
all that stuff.
So as a little girl, where did you get your toys from? Your dolls and whatnot. This is gonna be, folks. This is gonna
Well,
be interesting.
we got dolls for Christmas,
Hmm. And
and I had a wooden doll,
okay.
and then I had one that was called a Plassy doll,
Hmm.
and that had a cloth body,
Hmm.
and then the arms and the head and the legs were different. You know, they were made out of that. I don't know what it, kind of a plastic, I guess you'd call it. I don't know, but it was called Plassy anyway.
Hmm.
And
But
then one of the things that my sister and I played with that we really liked was our paper dolls.
that's what I was referring to because I remember you telling us kids and actually helped my sisters to make similar things for themselves, like like
Yeah,
like you would take cutouts from the catalogs and make little tabs on them so that they would hang on to the paper dolls, the clothing would and stuff.
yes. And then back then, if you could get a hold of a funny paper, a lot of times Dad would buy the Sunday paper. He didn't buy it through the week, but
Hmm.
he'd buy a Sunday paper,
Hmm.
and they would have the comic section, boy, section
Hmm.
in it, and there would be sometimes a paper doll thing in there that you could cut out and
Oh,
play with.
interesting.
So,
So you
and then of course
go ahead.
I was gonna say, and then we played jump rope.
Hmm.
That was real common back then.
Mm-hmm. What did Uncle Art play with?
You know, he had a 22 when he was quite young,
Hmm.
and
So
and
just so
I
people
don't
know,
really remember.
all right,
I don't really remember him having,
a whole lot.
no, not that kind of stuff. I don't.
So just so
Of
people
course,
know,
he
if
was.
you hear people in the background, my mother's at work at their store. So go ahead, Mom.
Well, I was going to say Art was 6 years older than me,
Okay.
so I'd have been by the time I was 4, he would have been 10,
Hmm.
and maybe I just don't remember some of
Hmm.
the stuff he had.
So there was no garden over at that tar paper shack. Then when you moved over
Oh
to,
yes,
oh, you did have a garden on that side of the road.
oh yeah,
Okay.
oh yes, we did.
So was there wasn't any like a electric freezer or anything? So grandma canned. When
Yeah.
at what point did you kids start helping out with the house and the gardening and things like that to help just life and basically what now people consider a homestead? When did you kids begin to help like weed the garden or pick vegetables or whatever, or feed the
Well,
animals or whatever?
the first memory I have of doing something was we were standing on stools and doing the dishes.
Mm. So you were
And
young.
then from then on, yeah, we were pretty young.
Hmm.
And then we helped with other things after that.
So once you
So,
started, you didn't stop. I mean, you had your playtime, but you also had your chores that you had to do.
yeah, we helped with,
Hmm.
right?
So you had the garden. How was that garden worked up? What did Grandpa do to? How big was it, and what did Grandpa
Well,
do to work up the dirt,
well,
particularly each year before planting?
the horse and the plow.
So it was a single bottom plow, one plow blade.
That's what I remember.
Mm-hmm.
And then he would use the discs for something too,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't remember at what point
It would be after
he used
plowing.
the disc.
Mm-hmm. It'd be after plowing, just like you
Oh,
would with a tractor. You would turn the furrows over, and then you would disc it
okay,
up and work it all up, and then you would drag it to get the big stuff out.
okay.
Hmm.
Must have been what he did then.
Yep. Now we have tillers, basically gigantic rototillers that come behind, like for small plot, not for fields. You still do the same as what grandpa did and what dad did with the tractor, but I just use a tiller and I'm done with it, pretty much. A big tiller on the tractor and I'm done with it. So I don't have a clue. I mean, I know what it's like to pull a 1 and 2 bottom plow with a little farmall tractor, but not with a horse.
There's one thing about it too. My dad loved his horses,
Yes,
so
he did.
that I think he enjoyed doing that rather than feeling like it was a lot of work.
It might have been his thinking time, along with having the horses work. It might have been some thinking time.
Well, that's possible.
Yeah.
And
So,
another thing I remember about living over there was our first car was a Model A, and
mm,
I remember my dad cranking that to, and then you had to be careful when you cranked it. Boy, when that caught, you could have your arm broke.
yeah.
So you had to let loose right now.
So you're talking about the crank at the beginning of at the sticking out of the front of the car.
Right,
Hmm.
yeah, to get the motor going.
Yep. Kind of like the airplanes when they had to spin the prop to get it running.
Yeah,
S-
exactly.
Yep. So going back to Grandpa and Grandma, where did Grandma grow up? Where did they meet before they moved, or did they meet in Tawas?
She grew up in Detroit,
So Grandma grew up in Detroit.
so I don't know um, why she came up to Taos, but my uncle Harry, which was my grandmother's brother,
Hmm.
had a small house. If you went on the track, it'd probably be about a half a mile. But if you went by the road, it'd be a mile and a half.
So the house
But
you're talking, Uncle Harry's house, was uh, off the railroad track towards the Red
right,
Schoolhouse.
right, he was about
Hmm.
a half mile from the Red Schoolhouse.
Hmm.
And Grandma came up here, and she was staying with them, and I don't know why. And that's where Dad met her.
Okay. So they married there and they stayed in the area as long as I can remember from that point.
Right.
Okay.
Yes.
So they didn't meet by the internet or Twitter or
I guess not.
no, none of those modern day search for your soulmate type of thing. Maybe they met by Tweety Bird or Lovebird or something like that, not Twitter or whatever they call it now. I don't even know what they not Twitter. I don't know what's it called. Um, Tinder. That's what it's called. They called it Tinder, not Twitter. Tinder. I don't even
Ah,
know. But yeah, couples get on this thing called Tinder and they look for somebody they can date and possibly marry. Well, that didn't happen with
ah,
Grandpa and Grandma, and it didn't happen with you and Dad either, did it?
no, no.
So, um, so you had three kids living in the house, and then you moved over to Great Grandpa's house, which is the house that I knew. Then they eventually got the well and the electric in and the phone. And so let me see what I have for questions here. Oh, tell me a little bit about your first, some of your first memories of Grandma. We talked a little bit about how she would can on that cast iron potbelly stove. Um, but it back then it took two people to run a house. I mean, did Grandpa? Oh, first of all, did Grandpa hold more than one job? I guess I'm getting ahead of myself. And did he work? Did he work where I know he worked? As long as you can remember, or how did that play out?
Yeah, as long as I remember, that's the only job he had was at USG.
So USG, for people that don't know, which that company is still in existence, is US Gypsum, and they had one of the big deposits up there, and Grandpa worked there as what?
Well, he drilled the hole for the blasting,
Okay, so,
and when we were young, they used dynamite.
mm-hmm.
I don't know what they use now, but he would drill the hole. They put the dynamite in, and then
Would run for their life.
well, they had a building to go in.
Yeah.
They had a small building because that rock would fly. And as I remember, they would shut off part of US 23 so
Mm-hmm.
cars couldn't be going through and maybe get hit right by rock
Mm-hmm.
when the blasting went off.
Mm-hmm. So basically, if people remember a little box with two wires coming out of it and a plunger, that's what they used to detonate the
Dynamite.
the charge of the dynamite. They'd stick a cap in it and blow it to smithereens like Wile E. Coyote.
And that's where he was my step grandpa, but he worked at Alabaster too.
Okay.
And that's where a huge rock, apparently they thought it was stable or something, I don't know, rolled down and crushed him. And he lived for a few hours, but he died
Oh.
from
Uh,
that.
your step. You said your step grandfather or your stepfather? Step grandfather.
Step grandfather, because my grandma and her first husband were divorced,
Okay.
and she married Grandpa Smalls, and he was a very nice man.
Oh, that's okay. That's where that comes in. I know the name.
Yeah.
So let's see here what I got. So other than grandma canning, hanging a blanket or something across the rooms to kind of isolate the heat or whatever. What was one of your first memories of her?
Well, that would be hard to say. I remember her. I know I was 2.5 when I. That's the first memory that I can think of. I had the measles,
Hmm.
and back then they would uh, keep you in a dark room. I don't know if they still do or not, but that's what they did. And I remember, of course, I remember Mom, and I remember the doctor coming out looking at us, and I remember Aunt Fran in the kitchen, standing by the stove in the kitchen. They had the living room was dark, but you could see into the kitchen where it was lighter. So that's the first memory that I can remember.
Hmm. What What were some of the things that Grandma did to keep the homestead afloat, other than canning and cooking and doing the laundry? What were some of her home, what you would consider her home skills that were vital to the survival of the family? Skills that actually might be useful as we go into the future here in uncertain times.
Well, I don't know how to answer that because everything back there was vital. You didn't go into the grocery store and buy frozen stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah. Or cake mixes. That was all by hand, which was probably better for you, but it still is a lot of work for a
Hmm.
homekeeper.
So we heard that you told us that you had a cow or cows to milk, more than one or how many?
Well, I think he had more than one because he would bring the milk in, and then we had a cream separator in the kitchen, and they would pour that into the. I don't know if you know what they look like or not. They're like almost like a real round bowl,
Talking about a turn or
and you
not a
poured it.
turn?
Pardon?
Not a butter turn.
No,
Okay.
no. It's a big round bowl, and you pour the milk in there, and then I don't remember if they turned the handle or what, but it would separate the milk from the cream. And then they would take the cream. Sometimes I think they took eggs, and they would take it to where we got the green bags for the dresses.
Hmm.
It was an elevator like Ginrich's, and they would trade that for uh, like the grain and stuff.
So you had cows to milk. Did Grandpa have, did you actually use them for beef at all? Like, steak and roast and all that?
No,
Never.
no, no.
And you had horses. He had at least two horses at any given time. Any more than two? Or just two usually?
Usually just two.
Okay. Except for the time that he bought that ornery Shetland pony that tried to kill me.
Yeah,
I remember that distinctly, and I do not like that horse. I hope it's dead.
I would think. When you,
That thing literally, and people say, "Oh, it didn't try to kill you." That thing knew what it was doing. It when it bucked me, it wanted to buck me into that hay rake. It knew exactly what it was doing.
you know what I think too. They can. A horse knows if you're not
Seasoned.
handy at yet.
Hmm.
They know,
Yep.
and they
And
can get ornery
oh
times.
yeah. Luckily, I held on, and Grandpa got that horse. But and if I remember right, he tried to brush somebody else off. He just did not want to be ridden
Yes.
because Laura and Steve and them were there too, and he tried to brush one of them off on one of the old cars sitting around there or something
Oh
like
my
that.
goodness. I don't think Grandpa had him very long.
No, no, he got rid of him after that. He didn't. He wasn't going to put up with it. Grandpa was a good grandpa, and he loved and enjoyed his grandchildren. So now I remember the house after you're 8 years old and you moved across the road, and you would go up the driveway across the little creek or runoff and up on there to park where the horses were, and you'd go to the right through the gate where the lilac bush was. Swings on
Yep.
the in the by the way the water pump was out there by the road. You'd go through the gate, and on the right was the swing and the little path down to the road over the creek with a little concrete footbridge. I
Yep.
remember I remember to the left was a longer building. What I remember is, I believe, was a chicken coop and a little tool shed. Is that correct?
The chicken coop was not very far from the house. You didn't have to go over the bridge or anything to get to
Right.
that.
It was like to the left of the gate as you come into the gate to go to the house.
Well, yes. Yep. The gate where you park the car.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
and in that chicken coop, well, there was no chickens when as far as I can recall, but a lot of Grandpa's hand tools were in that building, such as uh, hand crank drills and vices and things like that. But when you were a girl, Grandpa and his father, they must have had chickens in that chicken coop because it was a good sized building for chickens.
Yes. Yes, they did. And
S-
we ate chicken a lot on
So
Sunday.
So they had a good bit of chickens then, and they took care of those chickens themselves. They didn't go to any store to buy chicken then to eat or for eggs.
Right. That's right.
So
And that
you would
helped
have
a
to
lot.
so you'd have to feed the chickens every day, at least once a day, and make
Yeah.
sure they were doing well. And did they free range also across the yard, or did they stay in the chicken coop?
Could go in the yard, as I remember, some earlier, but then later, my dad built a good sized fence, so they had quite a good run, but they could only go out through. There's a small door in the chicken
Mm-hmm.
coop there, and they would
Mm-hmm.
go in and out there. And he probably built that like that, and with the fence to make sure and keep coon and out.
And hawks,
Cause coon, yeah,
coon, fox, and hawks.
the fox wouldn't be quite so quick with the dogs, but
Okay.
those coons, and they like to kill chickens.
Hmm. So about how many chickens do you think you guys had?
That I don't remember, Tim.
Enough
I
to
remember
support
going in there and getting the eggs, but
enough to support two families, at least your grandparents and your family
yeah, well, there was just Grandpa then
at that
when
point.
I
Okay.
remember. Yeah, just Grandpa.
And then I also remember off of the back step of the mud room where you would go down to the basement as well. There was an apple tree there,
Yep.
and then I think there was actually two. There was one closer to the door and one on the corner of the house.
Yeah, there was one that shaded the window in that back bedroom there,
Yes.
right off the. Yep.
And then off of the corner of Grandpa and Grandma's bedroom was a pear tree.
And it had delicious prayers.
Pear.
Delicious prayers.
Mm-hmm. And then between the two trees, off of the yard, before you get into the field, was a row, at least one row, I think maybe two or three of grapes.
Yep. Yep.
I think it was two. I can't remember for sure. So
And
you had,
they were kind of sour, but the dog would eat them.
huh? So then I remember at one point Grandpa plowing that field up behind the house, and then there was a point when he no longer did. What?
Yeah, we had a garden back there.
Okay, so
Yep.
you had a garden back there. What kind of food grew in that garden?
Oh, all kinds. Beets, carrots. Uh, I don't know, Swiss chard or spinach. I don't know which. Corn,
Radish, squash,
onions, radish. Yep.
potato.
Yep.
What
About everything
else?
you could name.
So,
But
in essence, you guys ate for the most part from what you grew and maintained and preserved.
right. Yes.
So did you do dry preserving too, like the grain and the flour, crush the grain to flour as well as canned at that point?
No. No. No, they would buy the flour. But there again, you got it. Their grandma baked a lot of bread,
Mm-hmm.
homemade bread,
Mm-hmm.
which I love homemade bread.
Yep.
But there's another chore for her
Yes.
back then.
Yep. She knew how to cook.
Yeah, she was a good cook.
And the
Oh, cabbage was another thing we grew.
yep, because she would do the cabbage, the boiled cabbage.
Yep.
I remember boiled cabbage. Um, so when she canned at that point, you're in Grandpa's house. When she canned, was the canned goods down in the basement where the steps went down to the basement as the steps went up into the house by the bathroom there.
Yeah, that's pretty much where it was stored. Yeah.
Okay, so it was stored there, and then for enjoyment, Grandpa had a little library. I remember the little library at the corner of the far end of the house with his Western books that he would read.
Yeah, in that narrow room.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, what other things can you recall that of life skills and things that Grandpa and Grandma had to do that you had to do growing up to to actually survive. And they didn't really burn a lot of wood. They burned wood in the back end, but they burned fuel oil in the front end, from what I recall.
Yes, that was later years. Earlier years, what we had was a pot-bellied stove.
In the new house.
Where you, in the different place, and it would you'd cook on one side and be cold on the back, or however you turned. The one side would be warm, maybe hot, and the other side not so hot.
And that is that was in Grandpa Romer's house.
Well, that was in our first place too, and Grandpa Romer's, and then later on they was able to afford the fuel oil.
Okay, so
but they still then had that stove in the kitchen
Mhm.
that burned some wood.
In the kitchen or in the back mudroom?
No, it was in the kitchen. It was in the corner. Um, when you go into the kitchen, you turn just on the right
Okay.
was the stove they put in there.
I can't recall if I remember that or not. I think it was taken out by the time I remember anything.
No, it was still going.
Was it?
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah.
I don't remember it.
Yep, it was still there.
I remember coming from the living room, going along that wall, then you had that bedroom there, and if you would the kitchen area and the table was on the left, you kept going, you would go through the door to the mudroom on the left and the bathroom on the right.
Right.
And then
Yep.
if you went down the stairs into the mudroom, you would hook a right, come back on yourself, and you'd go down into the basement. If you hooked a complete right, you'd just go outside.
Yeah, there was a door to go
Yep.
outside. That's right.
So,
And the washing machine was out there too.
oh yeah, yep. What other fruit trees did you guys have? Was there any other fruit trees that I'm missing that I don't remember?
Yes, especially when you cross that little bridge you talked about, that little cement bridge
Yes.
on the left there, and there was different varieties of apple trees. And that
Okay.
was another thing she canned was applesauce, of course.
But those trees were not as big as the ones by the house, I don't think. So
I don't know.
I think they were maybe they were pruned to stay to where you could pick the stuff. I don't remember them being huge. I remember the huge tree out by the water pump house on the corner of the drive. I mean, that was a huge tree.
Yes, and that had lilacs around it too, where the pump was. That was about 500 feet from the house.
Yeah.
Which is quite a ways to haul water.
Mm-hmm.
But boy, was that water good in the summer. Oh my goodness. Be thirsty and it'd be nice and icy cold.
I remember along the wood, if you go past the barn and along the wood line towards the railroad tracks out in that way, there was actually natural mint growing out on those tree lines. And I can't remember if it was wintergreen or if it was spearmint.
I know there was some spearmint leaves actually too, right when you crossed that little bridge in the yard, and then you went out that gate onto the road.
Mm-hmm.
And right across from that gate was spearmint leaves.
So I'm guessing then if you go past the barn out into that little field where we would go into the woods to cut wood, that if you, instead of going right where we cut wood along that tree line, if you go left and follow the trail back that way, kind of parallel to the railroad tracks, back in there is where I remember the spearmint. It's probably natural spearmint then, because that's because I remember going back in there and with when we spent the summer up or a week during the summer up there, that we'd go back there and chew on those leaves.
Oh, really?
Yep.
Well, we had a bunch of wintergreen growing in the ditches, and when we walked to school or walked home, we'd pick some of those wintergreen berries.
Well, maybe it was both then. Maybe it was wintergreen. I wonder if
wintergreen just, you know how wintergreen grows? Just down. They're just small plants.
Yeah, it's almost like strawberry plants.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what it was.
Yep. Okay.
So it might have been the wintergreen.
And they had red berries on them during some of the year.
Yeah.
In the summer.
So what else is there anything else that you can remember that that was very useful that you guys did yourself to maintain life and to eat and to be clothed and various things like that?
I don't know in particular, because like I said, it was just normal growing up for us.
Mhm.
Wasn't anything.
Did Grandpa have more than one job, or did he just have the one job and then came home and did all the work at the house, like worked his tail off at the
Just
house?
job,
Hmm.
one job,
One job.
and then the farm.
Which is what a
He
lot of
kept,
farmers do when I was growing up too. They would have, shop jobs or whatever and still farmed, or they'd have construction jobs and farmed.
and another thing, and Dad and I here was talking about it that people go on vacations. Well, we never even thought of vacation back then.
Yeah, what was
We
it?
didn't go. No, yeah, nobody that I know of went on one.
Oh,
We
well,
certainly did.
nobody that you knew. The rich went on vacations because that's how they lived. They lived a
They
vacation.
they probably did, and I see articles about right here in Augrey, of a point lookout there where people came by boat to do, to vacation and that.
Hmm.
It astounds me
Yeah.
because up there everybody worked hard, and I don't recall any vacation where our area was.
Mm.
And of course, none of the now like nowadays they come all the way from even Ann Arbor and all those big cities, and they come up here and have cottages and everything like that. Well, that wasn't even thought of back then,
Hmm.
even in Tawas.
Well, and I didn't realize this until about 3 years ago that the harbor there in Augrey is on what is considered the Golden Loop. And if you remember
Oh,
when,
really?
yeah, when I was a child, and I don't know what they're doing with it today. I think maybe they're trying to revive it. But you remember all the sailboats that would come up to the harbor there just before US 23 and dock there, and people would come off the boats and walk and ride their bikes around town and whatnot.
I
That's
didn't know. Go ahead.
that's part of the Golden Loop, and what the Golden Loop is, and it's world known. If well, you don't have a computer, but um, if you were to look up the Golden Loop, you could come off of the Atlantic Ocean and go through the Great Lakes, through the St. Lawrence Seaway, and go through the locks at the Niagara Falls into the Detroit River and go around Michigan, Lake Huron, around Mackinac, back down to Chicago, into the Illinois River, take the Illinois River over to the Mississippi River and back down to the Gulf of Mexico and do the Golden Loop.
Huh?
And in
Something isn't.
Yup, and Augrey is on that Golden Loop. And I did not realize that. It's been 5 years now. And the reason why I found out about that is because two or three times I delivered these big sailboats to this harbor on the Illinois River in Illinois, just somewhat south of Interstate 80. And I was talking to one of the guys there, and he's like, I'm like, how do you guys get business on this route? And he's like, oh, we're on the Golden Loop. I mean, we have people from all over the world stopping in here.
Oh, we're gonna
And
say.
he described it to me, and Augrey is on that Golden Loop.
Huh? That's something.
Yep. So they would come in there, and then they'd go right up past Tawas, in that little area there, up past Oscoda, up into Alpena, and just keep right on it going.
Huh? That's something.
Yep. But anyways, um, is there anything that you can think of that would be helpful for people to kind of maybe help them along? I don't know where we're heading to, but I know that right now we're getting set up to where we can do things for ourselves and rely less and less and less on the store or the grocery stores. And I think I was telling Sherry as we were riding the bike, everywhere we ride our bike right now in our area, you see fences going up and you see animals coming in, you see cows and chickens and different things. People are getting back to doing for themselves, not on a huge scale, but on a scale enough to where they can, sustain some sort of life.
Well, one of the first things would be like we've talked about, if you have enough land and the soil will support at least certain amount of vegetables,
Hmm.
it would be good to have a garden
Yep.
if you can possibly and can some of that stuff.
Hmm.
It's better for you than the store stuff anyway.
Yeah.
Another thing, and these are just small things that Dad and I do after we've used our toothpaste tube and it's all seems to be squashed flat.
Hmm.
If you cut that tube in half and you take your toothbrush and just run it along the inside, you can get about 6 or more additional brushings from it.
Huh. And I thought I was doing really good just squeezing the living daylights out of the thing. With
Well, I wish that when you kids were growing up, we would have realized that.
Yeah, no kidding.
It was Dad's idea to cut it in half and see what it was like, and we thought, hey, this is
Yeah,
good.
no kidding. Yeah. So
And
what?
another,
Go ahead.
what we used to brush with as kids was baking soda and salt.
Yes.
So
Yep. So we're
and you
lucky.
could also do
Yep.
that.
We're lucky. When we got into this house, we found out that we have a peach tree and another kind of tree. I can't remember what the other. I think it's a pear. We have a peach tree and a pear tree, blueberries. We have herbs. We've got a garden space. I'm going to have 3 garden spaces, and I'm getting ready to put up a greenhouse. And I'm going to talk to somebody at church that does goats and stuff. And we have and we're getting chickens in, and I'm getting ready to build a chicken coop and a chicken run like Grandpa did. And so these are the things that we're doing. And the next thing I need to do is to get back into canning, because like when we grew up, I remember picking beans and corn and all kinds of stuff and spending time during the summer canning, and that was good eating.
Oh, and another thing, you mentioned blueberries. That was another thing. We did a lot of picking of blueberries even
Yep.
as kids. Well, you kids helped me because we picked blueberries
Well,
when
that
we
was
were
fun.
growing
Well,
up.
we enjoyed that. The only thing we didn't enjoy would have been the flies and the bugs if they were out. But other than
Yeah.
that, we went over past uh, what came off of Michigan Avenue over there where the oil
Yep.
pump was, and picked over there. We picked strawberries out behind the house. Um,
You won't
and over
believe it,
down
Tim.
Tawas too, we picked blueberries.
Oh, yes. Yes. And we picked strawberries too, what we could. And one thing you mentioned those blueberries and the swamp where we used to go in, like you're saying,
Hmm.
off Michigan Avenue.
Hmm.
People have built up in there.
Oh yeah.
I can't believe it. And another thing they had there, I don't know if you remember it or not, but they had a cranberry bog, a wild cranberry bog.
Hmm. Yep, I remember it.
And those cranberries were so good.
Yep, I remember it. I remember picking
Yeah.
cranberries a couple years. Sure do.
Yep.
Yep.
You had to wait till the frost came and then they were ready.
Yep, I remember them. We used to
It
eat
was,
all that stuff, a little bit of it, before we ever processed it. But
oh, yeah. Yeah.
and then I also remember 1 or 2 times going to an actual strawberry farm where you pick it yourself, and it was like just above the knee up to the waist, where you could pick as much as you could pick and go back up to the shack and pay for it. Now I don't remember where that was, but I remember that once or twice doing that.
I'd forgotten about that, but yeah.
And then I also remember going over to 2 places to pick apples, and one was Ginrich's, Joe Ginrich's house. Those apples were awesome. And then and then off of Delano, I think it's Tonky Road. Off of Tonky Road, those apple trees over on the other side of the big ditch there on Tonky Road. We used to get apples a couple times there.
I'm thinking maybe we picked some at Bender's too. I'm not
We did.
positive, but
Yes, we did. We 2 or 3 times we did. Yep, we certainly did.
okay.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that would be a good thing for people to can if they could. Would
Yeah.
be if they could find reasonable apples, uh, because the home canned applesauce is more filling
Mm-hmm.
than what you get in the store.
And it's
At least what we get up here.
good frozen. Oh, remember freezing it and putting cinnamon in it? Mm.
Yes. Yeah. We canned and froze.
Yep, and the cooked apples with cinnamon was so good.
Yes.
Um,
Applesauce with cinnamon.
yeah, we picked at Bender's. I think the way Dad got us to there was they had done the roof on the barn for Bender's, and then Bender said we could come pick apples.
Yep. They did work on that barn.
Yep,
Yeah.
and it was right after, or during the time or after they were working on that barn that we were picking apples for a little bit there.
Yeah.
But yeah, I remember the soil there at home and whatnot. So I just thought it would be interesting to talk with you, and maybe people that listen to this conversation just might enjoy uh, hearing what it was like, not relying on television to tell them or to show them or anything else, but rely on somebody who grew up in that era and understand what it took to actually live and survive without a lot of the modern conveniences that we have today that we take for granted, that we may very well lose in the future if we're not careful.
Well, yes. And I've talked about that too. We've got plenty of food right now, but that might even be scarce
Hmm.
coming up, like you've been saying, because it could happen.
Oh, I think it's coming, and it's coming by engineered. It's coming on purpose. Sadly, it's
There's so much of that coming on purpose. That's true.
yeah. I would like to do the same thing sometime if Dad had time and energy to sit down and have a phone conversation and kind of go through the same thing with him, that because he grew up similarly, a little different operation going on when he was a kid, but they worked their tails off when they were kids too, and did different things to survive. And Grandma Wright knew what it was like to can and maintain the house, and Grandpa worked his tail off, and Dad, he's worked hard ever since I can remember. And
Well, they, as yes, as youngsters, they worked. Like Dolores and I were girls. We weren't that strong,
hmm
so we didn't have a lot of the things as far as the farm.
hmm
Dad took care of that.
hmm
We girls were not involved, and Art helped, of course. It helped Grandpa.
hmm
And Dad and his brother worked, especially him and Don, being older than Dale, and both only a year apart.
hmm
Yeah,
well,
it
and
would
I
have
think
been.
I think they had a little more land to work too. They had more land to work with the tractor, and they had more land for the animals, and they had more help, obviously.
I don't know if they had more land, but ours had a lot of woods on it.
Okay, so that was the difference. I'm thinking of, and I don't know how far back the property went into the woods. I'm just thinking of the cleared area is why I said that. So you're right. Whereas Grandpa's
Yeah,
land went back to the wood line. He had that ridge with the cedars on it and the rocks, but that went back to the wood line. I don't remember how far into the woods it went.
yeah,
Grandpa,
they had a lot more field that they worked.
yeah, yeah.
So,
And I don't remember, did they work the field across from the driveway, across the road or not? Was that somebody else's?
I don't know.
Where Uncle Don has a part, where Uncle Don and them have that house. I think at one time, I think that was Grandpa's part, and that's
That
how they got their land was from Grandpa.
yeah, that's true.
So at
Yes,
one point there was at least a plot across the road that they had as well.
right.
But
Yeah, they had some farm stuff across the road. I was thinking uh, across the drive. I don't know.
yeah,
I got that in my mind.
yeah, over to towards Ginrich's, yeah,
Right.
and then back along the wood line, and then towards the Edmonds.
Yeah.
So yeah, well, um, I I hope that this was kind of a not just entertaining, but interesting for those that might wander across this video and just kind of listen, guys. If you're listening to this and you're kind of seeing what I'm seeing, you might want to start making some changes in your lifestyle in how you know do things to prepare yourself to sustain yourself when slimmings are getting or when pickings are getting slim, I should say. I can't even talk myself. When you can't go to the grocery store and you can't find what you need, maybe you should prepare to grow and raise those things yourself and learn how to preserve it. Um, at the same time, like mom was saying, my mother was saying that to grow your own vegetables, to grow your own fruit trees, possibly put up a greenhouse so you can grow into the winter or before the frost breaks. Um, it's a lot healthier to eat what you grow and what you know than it is what you don't know and what you don't grow. And so I think that those are things that we should start thinking about if you haven't already. I think that it's almost too late to think about it because by the time, if you're not working on it now, by the time you're going to need it, it's going to be too late and it's going to be either non-existent or so expensive and you're going to make so little that you won't be able to afford it or find it. And so, I beyond that, I just hope that you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did. Just kind of remembering and going back into my mother's memory, what it took to actually live. And so, is there anything else that you want to tell people, Mom?
Not in particular, but what is sad, at least up here, we used to be able, and you probably remember that, we could buy bushels of peaches,
Mm-hmm.
bushels of pears,
Mm-hmm.
uh, bushels of different things, and now we never see that.
Hmm.
It's strange, but that's how come we could can peaches and stuff because we didn't have the peach tree, any peach tree here.
Mm-hmm.
And I used to buy them by the bushel, and you could save money by canning. But I don't know how that's gonna, and I don't know how they can get it now in bushels if people can.
Well, you could go to the roadside stand and buy bushels of potatoes and carrots too, and green
Yes,
beans.
that I'm sure you could, and corn probably
Mm-hmm.
in
Yes, and corn,
if you
like
wanted.
like Eichsted's or down to Standish there. But around here where we are, we can, if we wanted to, we have farm markets that are actually owned by the farmers, and we still have one major peach orchard and an apple orchard where, but the problem is that like the apples, I'm sure they're sprayed.
Oh
Um,
boy,
but a lot of
you'd
the
have to wash them good.
exactly a lot. Well, that stuff it leaches into the skin and whatnot, and it's not
Into the
necessarily.
flesh.
Yes, it's not necessarily just because you wash it doesn't mean it's gone.
Mm.
But the one place they actually for the peaches that cannot make it to market for having flaws on it or whatever, they actually and they have like big pallet bins that they will dump these peaches into. People can come and pick their own peaches out, and
Wow.
they either donate money for them or they can have them, which is really nice of them.
Well, I guess.
So we do have those opportunities still here in our area, but I would still like to grow my own peach trees and my own apple trees and a couple other kinds of trees. So that's what we're working on, and hopefully we can get it done before it's too late.
It doesn't hurt because uh, like apple trees, and I don't know about the peaches, but I assume they're the same. One year they might uh, have tons of fruit, and the next year, no.
Right.
The trees rest or something. I don't
Hmm.
know just what it is, but so you never know what you can get. So get it where you can get it,
Yep.
can it,
Yep.
and freeze it like you said.
Hmm. Yep. And the other thing would like to do is I'd like to get a couple of goats here for milk and maybe some sheep because sheep, I think, and I'm going to look into this more and talk to a guy that we used to go to church with, but you can eat sheep and it's very good meat. I've never had it, um,
No,
but they are. I think that they eat less. They're high maintenance as far as their wool is concerned. But I
you
don't.
know what?
Go ahead.
I'm gonna say when you talk to Dad, he can tell you that stuff.
You're
He
right.
had sheep.
I need to talk to Dad because I'm thinking about getting like I have a dozen sheep in here and
Yeah,
about 2 to 3 to 4 goats.
but the one thing about the sheep is that you have to have them, you know, the wool off.
Exactly. That's
They have to.
yep.
I don't know what that'd be like.
But I don't think I have enough. I know I can put goats in here. I don't know as I have enough um
For
space for.
sheep, huh?
No, I don't know if I have enough space for cows. I'm pretty sure I don't because the cows need space.
Yeah, yeah.
But anyways, um, well, I think that we've pretty much exhausted the whole memory lane thing.
Probably. If there is anything, they'll think of it later. It'll be too late.
Yeah.
But that's the way life is. So,
Hmm.
okay, Tim.
All right. Until I call Dad, I'm gonna have to hook up with Dad and see if he's willing to do the same thing and make arrangements and then we'll have one video with you on it and one video with him on it. So we have kind of hopefully, and if he doesn't, that's fine too. If he doesn't want to, that's fine. But it would be cool to have your point of view and how you grew up, and then how he grew up because you grew up in two separate families, of course. So
Right.
um,
Yeah.
that'd be kind of interesting to have. And then also because I'm recording it, if my siblings or their children ever want to hear this conversation, or my children or our grandchildren, will have this conversation on record.
That's right. Yeah, that is a good idea.
So,
Yeah.
alrighty then, Mom. I thank you for having this conversation, and I'll talk to you soon again. We
Okay. You're welcome,
All
Tim.
right. I love you.
Yeah. Love you too.
All right.
Bye bye.
Bye. All right, everybody. Well, if you've stumbled across this video, I hope that you've enjoyed the conversation that I just had with my mother in reminiscing about what life was like coming or living after the era of the Great Depression in the United States of America, as she grew up as a young girl, and what it took for her parents, her father and her mother and her grandfather, to actually make a go of it, being poor, societally poor, hardworking, poor people, and what they did to feed their families. And with that, I thank you for joining me, and I just hope that this video will have done you some sort of good, and I will see you again in the next video. Thank you for stopping by.